Hello, everyone. This is Deepa Iyer, and this is my first YouTube channel where I hope to share content that's connected to the writing that I've been doing around social change. I'm so excited to begin a new series of conversations related to how we can talk with our children about social change. As a mother myself, educator, and writer, I often reflect about why and how it's important to be in conversation with young people and children about issues in our society and how to engage them. How do we prepare children and young people for the unprecedented and overlapping crises in our world today? What tools and language do they need, and how can we source and share them? To get some fresh insights into these questions, I've reached out to writers, educators, and caregivers who are finding ways to engage, support, and inspire children and young people to tend to the issues that are facing our society today. I'm in conversation now with Dr. Sarah-SoonLing Blackburn, who is an educator, speaker, and professional learning facilitator. Sarah is also the author of a forthcoming book for young people called Exclusion and the Chinese American Story. Kirkus Reviews describes it as deftly written and informative, a call for vigilance and equality. Sarah, welcome.
Hi, Deepa. It's so lovely to be here with you.
Thank you so much for taking time. So I want to start by asking you this big question. Why do you write for children and young people?
I love that question. I've spent quite a bit of time thinking about it because, writing is both a joyful and creative process, and it's also kind of a slog sometimes, right? So, like asking ourselves, why do we try to pull those together? I think there's two things that really pushed me to want to write for young people. One is I was a teacher. I mostly taught third and fourth grade. And it was really, really important for me to make sure that my students, I taught mostly in the rural Mississippi Delta, a
Mm.
place where, there aren't that many kid-facing texts that kind of reflect the experiences of my students. So it was important for me to make sure that they could really see themselves in the literature. And then later, as I worked more coaching, training teachers, that was something I really wanted to promote. And then I kind of had this moment. I was like, almost 30 years old. And I was like, wait, I never had that experience. I was a very avid reader as a kid. I read so much. I read, just all kinds of things, fiction, nonfiction, and never really read anything that reflected my
Right.
story, my family, right? And then it's like both writing for my students and writing for myself and thinking about, I don't want the little Sarahs of the world to grow up kind of in that same thing where they love reading, but they never see themselves in what they're reading. So that was really important for me. And then this story, Exclusion and the Chinese American Story, these are about families like mine that I just didn't know. I didn't even know these types of people existed in the world. So it was really important to, yeah, to have that out there.
So actually, I want to hear more about the story that you've written, the book you've written. Can you tell us a little bit about the subject matter and also how you curated the content? I mean, Chinese exclusion is not necessarily an easy concept to convey to young people, nor I think is it easy to receive it because it is it's about a really challenging period in American history. So can you share a little bit about how you really brought that concept out in the book?
When I first started writing, there were two things I wanted to be true. So one, I wanted to be very real about the struggles. Even though most of the readers will be 9, 10, 11 years old, I didn't want to sugarcoat or gloss over racism, exclusion, all of these things. So I wanted that to be true. But I also wanted to be engaging and enjoyable for a 9, 10, 11-year-old to read. So how do you like square that circle? Was kind of a constant question for me. So even though the title is Exclusion in the Chinese American Story, in a lot of ways, I feel like it could have been more called like Exclusion and Belonging, or even just Belonging and the Chinese American Story, because what I wanted it to be was, yes, these things happened, and there were always people pushing back, saying we belong just as much as anybody else. working together across various differences. I mean, you do so much work in solidarity. So those are actually the main themes of the book, are both explaining exclusion and kind of divide and conquer to young people, but also resistance and solidarity to young people, so that those two things go hand in hand as we kind of cover the story of Chinese American history in the United States.
I love that, because what I'm hearing you say is this is going to be a tough topic, right? And it might be painful, it might be confusing, it might be unsettling. And also, here are examples of how our ancestors, right, responded to it in all these different ways, and allies responded to it. So I feel like it's that hopeful and inspiring piece that maybe young people don't see often. Which leads me to my next question, which is, I do sometimes feel, and maybe this is me, but I have felt this in my life, that this sense to want to protect children. I felt that with my son in particular at times, from all the tough issues in the world that they're going to inherit, right? Or they already are inheriting. How did you, in this book or in other contexts, balance this impulse to preserve their childhoods or their innocence, and the necessity to give them tools and vocabulary and critical thinking?
Yeah, it's a great question. I completely relate to that impulse also, as a parent, as a teacher, right? Like,
Yeah.
you want them to still feel joyful and hopeful about the world. A few things that I think are true. Our kids are acutely aware of injustice. Like, just imagine giving two kids different size piece of cake, right? Like, they're going to have a reaction to it. So they already have a
That's
strong
not
sense.
fair.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That's not fair. It's like one of the first phrases you will hear
Yes.
out of a toddler's mouth. And, that's like kind of a silly example, but extrapolate that. They're quick to learn about a social injustice and be able to say, that's not fair, that's not right. And so I think, like, pretending that they are not aware of the same things that we are, whether we like it or not, is not helpful. So how do we help them reckon with that and not become overwhelmed by it, hopeless, all of those things? So it's, again, like, sharing those stories that anytime you see oppression, you see struggle, you will always see resistance, you will always see resilience, is
Mhm.
a concept that kids can hold on to also. Um, and also that they, within a sense of injustice, or that's not fair, that they have the power to do something about it too, that they don't have to always wait on someone. Even with that piece of cake, you've got the bigger piece of cake, you can give some to your friend, right? Like, that is a
Yeah.
way to rectify that situation. There are ways that you can play a role. I tried to find the stories of people in the book to tell, because kids, when it's humanized, when history is humanized and they can relate to the stories of real people, it just makes it seem more relevant to their lives, which wasn't easy, because a lot of the stories I wanted to tell, there just aren't, like, historical records, or,
Mm.
there's, like, not great
Right.
books out there to find. But there were a few, and I think that was important, because it's like, if you can learn about this 16-year-old Chinese American teenager who fought for the women's rights to vote, that's a story I never learned. But that is a powerful story. And so for a kid to read about her, is like, that gives you a sense that this idea of empowerment is not just a nice thing to aspire to, it's like actually tangible and a thing that they can do.
Oh, that's great. I love that use of storytelling, because your book it's nonfiction, right?
Right.
But I mean, how did you, and maybe you can talk about it in the form of how do you want, I should say, right? Like teachers, educators, and parents to take the themes of your book. Like, what are your hopes that folks will, adults will take the themes of your book, and how do you want them to have conversations with young people in their lives about anti-Asian racism and the history of it, and also what's happening today?
Mhm. That's, I think the question almost answers
Yeah.
itself, which is the idea of connecting to today. Um,
Mm.
I'm a big reader. I do tend to read more fiction than nonfiction because there is a lot of, I hate to say it, all of you nonfiction writers out there, but there's a lot of like kind of dry nonfiction out there. And certainly as a teacher, I experienced how kids relate to some types of nonfiction more than others.
Mm,
So it was important to me to like put kids in the moment and then to draw connections to the present. So for example, if we're talking about building the railroads, which is a story some people might have heard about, saying, imagine you are standing in front of this mountain and these things are happening, put them in the moment. And then I tell the story of railroad workers, Chinese railroad workers who went on strike,
mm,
and talking about, okay, now if you hear about people organizing for their rights at work in your world around you, some of the things that they were fighting for, back then are the same things: better working conditions, better pay. Those are the same things people will be saying today, and making those connections to the present, which also helps. Like you mentioned, current anti-Asian racism, things like that, which we saw really particularly spike a couple of years ago, and continues to reverberate in various ways. I actually do think it helps kids to see that there's a through line, a historical through line, so it feels a little less random. Because
right.
that was something I did hear quite a bit of, the bewilderment of like, I thought we were like the good ones. I thought we were totally accepted. And that was almost more disorienting than saying, no, this is part of a long
Mm,
legacy, which is hard. It's painful to hear about. But when you hear about that legacy, you also learn about the efforts to combat that legacy. So it's not just that the racism has historical roots, but the reaction or the resistance to the racism has a legacy that you can join into as well.
I love that. And I also really appreciate those examples you provided about the railroad workers and the connection to unionizing today, for example, or even the 16-year-old child that you mentioned, who I had no idea about that story. So I'm really looking forward to reading the book as well. So another question I had was, I know that you do a lot of work to train and support educators and all around the country. And I'm curious how that work has shifted, what your perception is in terms of how that work has shifted in recent years, given the political climate in our country, and some highlights or best practices that you're seeing that can again help folks watching have some of these hard conversations in a climate and in a context where conversations and reading and literature about race and racism is not actually allowed even. It might be banned or prohibited.
Yeah, it's a major issue, and it's probably the number one question or concern that I've been hearing from educators these last couple of years. And in many places, even if it's not expressly prohibited, there is such a chilling effect or a fear that people
Yeah.
are self-censoring quite a bit, which is both understandable and, kind of means that this is steamrolling even more because people are stopping themselves from talking about issues with students.
Yeah.
A few things that I've seen be helpful. One is it's really forcing us educators, anyone who cares about social justice, social change, to be very specific and clear about what we mean. And so I'm seeing people start to unjargon their language a little bit, especially because the jargon is what is getting politicized in a lot of ways. So even words that, like, I think inclusion is a wonderful thing, and then suddenly inclusion is showing up on a list of like stuff you're not allowed to talk about because it's
Right.
been attached to all this stuff. But even that word, like, what does that actually mean? What do we mean? We want every kid to feel safe and welcome at school. I want everyone to be proud of who they are and not at the expense of anybody else. And that should be true for every kid. And if we
Yeah.
say that, I have found that there's far less resistance and a lot more opening to have conversation with families, with people who might be concerned, with administrators who, by and large, they're in a very tough position right now because they're trying to make sure that kids are still getting a high quality education, and they're responding to all these mandates that are coming down and navigating. So that's one thing. The other thing that I've seen, especially with like upper elementary and higher, is a lot of great work being done with student-led action projects.
Mm.
We're learning about this thing in school. Where do you see this play out in your community? You know, where do you see some reverberation or theme happen around you? It could be in big and small ways. Okay, what are you going to do about it? And then just kind of letting kids take the lead on that. We've always known that action-based learning, project-based learning is a great tool, but um, I'm seeing more people kind of lean into that, because as kids are really leading the way and asking the questions and doing the work, you know, it's it's kind of hard to like, you know, stop it, kid, like
Right.
we'll do that. So
Right. You want to encourage and empower.
right.
Yeah. Those are great. And you know, this piece on the unjargon, I actually have a different question about that, related as well. But I often feel that, you know, when we're having conversations with young people about issues, whether it's historical or, as you said, the through line to now, there's this tendency to want to right size the language, or to, you know, to make it such that these words that you and I and others might have a lot of fluency around, they don't necessarily resonate, right, with children and young people. So are there examples of maybe, you know, ways in which you might recommend that we think about shaping language, or even a hard conversation you've had with someone in your life who is younger, in the community, and what tools you use to navigate that, so that we're not using these like high level concepts that, you know, young people might not immediately resonate with.
Yeah. It's tough because like I don't always think it has to be mutually exclusive. Like I want kids to have
Yeah.
access to great vocabulary. Like that also matters to me. And there's no point in using these big words if they don't understand what it means, right? So it's like, how do we get them the both? Um, One thing I struggled with writing the book was the concept of a racial hierarchy. Like, oh my
Mm,
gosh, how do you explain to a 9-year-old a racial hierarchy? Like there's so much there.
yeah.
And so I eventually came up with an analogy, which was, imagine that you are in control of what food is served in your cafeteria every day. Like you have the power to do that. You're probably going to serve the things that you like. You think the things that you like are better than the things that you don't like. But what you like is based on your background, your family. Some of the things that you might serve a lot, someone else might be allergic to, or they might really not like it. And so now they don't feel welcome in the school cafeteria anymore because you've created this hierarchy. And it kind of like it kind of goes on and on. But the idea of like taking these big concepts, putting it in a different framework, and then coming back to the concept
Yeah.
was helpful, and also took some thinking. So I think that there's room for us to have conversations about what we can do or how we can help illustrate some of these as well.
That's a great example. Just, you know, just to say, that's great, because I think it also, you're talking about something that a child, and young person can immediately connect with, right? Cafeteria. I mean, these are, instead of, oh, let's talk about something that they might not have any sort of connection to at all. So I really appreciate that. And that's a great tool for, I think, any of us, to think about what these analogies might be. I want to ask you, actually, can you tell us a little bit more about the book itself? Like, how is it organized? You know, you mentioned a couple of things already. Are they actually in the book, like that analogy you mentioned? So can you talk a little bit about the organization and the framing of the book and why you made certain choices?
Yeah, it's chronological. And it is really kind of the sweep of Chinese American history, which is, you know, I understand like you cannot fit that all into one middle grades book. So I tried to think about those key themes I wanted, right? Exclusion, belonging. And then how do I tell that through line? I also wanted to tell specific stories of individuals. So the introduction opens with the story of the first Chinese woman that we have records of coming to the United States, and kind of tells her story. And then throughout each chapter, you'll always have at least one or two individuals
Mm.
stories are told, but it goes through from very early days, early 1800s through to the present era. So it does mention COVID, it mentions, the spike in anti-Asian hate, and it tries to draw the themes and connections along the way. Each chapter also has questions for the reader or for like a teacher or a parent to discuss. So for example, the opening chapter, that introduction, I talk about origin stories. Every culture, every community, we have origin stories, and origin stories are part of our sense of belonging. And so then it asks, like, what are the origin stories that you've heard, or who tells certain stories more than, like, which ones get told, which ones don't get told, like, why is that the case? What are the effects of some people's origin stories being told more than others, just to try to get the reader, whether they identify as Chinese American or not, to extrapolate and ask questions about their own lives and experiences too.
I love it. I'm so excited to get the book. I also think that, I don't know about you, but I love reading children's books.
Me
Um,
too.
I learned so much, both in terms of like history that I may have missed, but also socio-emotional learning that I didn't get when I was reading books at that age, right? I love the fact that these questions exist after each chapter, because that's I think such a great way to deepen the conversation with either a classroom or even a child in your life. So where can folks get your book? Where can they pre-order it? Where can they find it? All of that.
So right now you can pre-order it pretty much anywhere. It's on the Penguin Random House website, but it's also on like all major booksellers. Ask your local bookstore, ask your local library. I live in Oxford, Mississippi. We have a wonderful local bookstore, so they'll have it in stock. And it's also going to be available on audiobook on the same date on March 26th. So for all you audiobook fans, I am one of those. That's available too.
That's so great. Is there a website?
It's, if you search Exclusion in the Chinese American Story, you can also find it on my website,
Yeah.
which is Sarah-SoonLing.com, all one word. That is my first name, Sarah-SoonLing.
Well,
And
we'll include it in like the
yeah,
notes for this. That's great. And then as we kind of get to close, as you know, I have a children's book coming out this year called We Are the Builders, which uses
I'm so
the
excited.
social change ecosystem framework, that map behind me, as a point of entry. And I know we've actually talked about this framework. You've used it in different contexts, but it's a way to. I wrote the book, to be honest, because I was hearing from a lot of teachers and parents that they were using that map to empower the young people in their lives and in their classrooms, to find their own roles, but also to think about the roles that are being played, like in a school community, for example, right? And to understand that everything's connected. So I was wondering, as we close out, like what roles do you think you embody in your social change work, and how have these kind of switched in different contexts? And also, how do you think that this framework might be resonating with young people, or could resonate with young people and children?
First, I'm so excited for We Are the Builders, so that's going to be wonderful. I think this is another, we've been talking a lot about empowerment, about kids feeling like they have agency and a role in shaping the world they want to be true. And this is another tool that I think can help them, because it's, one of the reasons that it was hard to find stories to tell in the book was I didn't want it to just be the famous names, because I wanted to show that there are lots of different ways that people show up and create positive social change, which is kind of what this map does. It's not just the big flashy thing. Um, as I think about the roles that I've played over time as a teacher, you're really playing so many different things, and it can shift minute to minute even, which is wonderful. And as you know, if you're trying to hold all of the roles in an ecosystem, that's not necessarily very sustainable, which is, again, another reason why I think this framework is wonderful, because it can help us support each other along the way.
Mhm.
Lately, I've been trying to claim and lean more into that visionary role.
Yay, great.
And that's because I think that there is a lot play in a time that can feel like there's a lot of struggle, a lot of resistance, a lot of fighting for and against and all of that. I have found that I haven't had as much space for what I want to be true or what we want to be true for our future. And I do think that that visionary role can help us remember that we're not just like waging battles or like in the struggle just because, that it is for this better future. And so to name and claim like that is something I want, is to really hold space for, this is the world in which we can all just, you know, be ourselves and fully realize thriving communities and individuals. That's something I'm trying to do. Not there yet, but
yeah, I love hearing that, Sarah. And I really do believe that we're all, you know, a little bit of all of those pieces on the framework. But visionaries is like the one that I think a lot of us feel some level of like imposter syndrome
yes.
or yeah, I mean, and I also think that young people and children are the most powerful visionaries.
Yes.
Because they really do see this world without, they have the capacity to see the world without all the restrictions and the buts and the ifs and all of that that we put into it. So I think it's also a way to connect with our inner child, to be a visionary. So I'm really hoping that you continue to do that. And I'm so excited you wrote this book for all the Sarahs out there as well. So thank you for joining me on my first little series on talking to young people, talking to children about social change, both, and I love how you put it, both in terms of the hard, challenging experiences of oppression, and also the histories and legacy of resistance, as a way for us to impart some of our own histories and the through lines to today, as you mentioned, that I think young people already know about and feel, and sense. And hopefully books like yours can be a way for them to take action. So really appreciate that you did it, that you wrote it, and hoping that everybody listening, make sure you pre-order Sarah's book and then also get it into classrooms. That's really important too, so that educators can use it and incorporate Chinese American history into the classroom. So thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Deepa. Always a pleasure.
All right. We'll be back later with another episode, so make sure you follow us. But thanks everyone for watching. And for more information on We're the Builders, please check out www.socialchangemap.com. Thank you.